Jalen Hill pushed open the glass doors of Millstone Market with a soft chime. It was early afternoon, and the store buzzed with soft music, the whir of coolers, and the low murmur of middle-class routine. Everything about the place was polished. Shiny floors, curated displays, organic labels on almost everything. Jalen moved confidently but casually, earbuds tucked in, hoodie unzipped over a plain white t-shirt. He'd been in this store more times than he could count. His father owned it, after all. But no one here knew that. Not most of the staff, and certainly not the man currently watching him from behind the service desk. Mr. Caldwell, the store manager, stiffened the moment Jalen entered. He narrowed his eyes like a motion sensor tripped. From his perch near the security screens, he leaned down and muttered something into a walkie-talkie. Across the store, an employee in an apron nodded and subtly moved closer to the snack aisle. Jalen could feel it, the heat of eyes that didn't trust him. He ignored it. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He walked slowly past the shelves, selecting a bottle of pomegranate juice and a protein bar, his expression neutral. He paused briefly to check the nutrition label, then slipped his earbuds out. He didn't want anything to muffle what he already sensed brewing behind him. As he headed toward the checkout, he caught Caldwell's voice. "You," the manager said sharply, stepping in front of him. "Let's see what you've got in your pockets." Jalen blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Caldwell said, louder now, eyes darting to the other customers who had started to look over. "You've been wandering around in here long enough. Empty your pockets." Jalen's throat tightened. His first instinct was to laugh, not because it was funny, but because of how ridiculous it was. But the look on Caldwell's face made it clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a confrontation. "I didn't steal anything," Jalen said firmly. "You can check the cameras." Caldwell snorted. "We've been watching you. You've got no business in here unless you're buying something or stealing it." The room seemed to shrink around them. A mother nearby gripped her daughter's hand a little tighter. A cashier paused in mid-scan. And then Caldwell made the call. "Security to the front. We might need to contact the police." Jalen stood perfectly still. He held the receipt he'd just printed at the self-checkout. He had done nothing wrong. But somehow, in this man's eyes, he had already been tried, judged, and convicted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't protest. But inside, something broke. And soon, everyone would know who they had just tried to accuse. The shrill hum of silence filled the front of the store. Jalen stood motionless, juice bottle in one hand, receipt still in the other. It should have been enough. Proof that he had paid. But the way Caldwell loomed in front of him, puffed up with authority and assumption, made it clear that logic wouldn't matter here. Across the store, two uniformed officers entered briskly, their radios crackling faintly. Their presence caused a stir. Customers shifted aside, glancing between the teenager and the manager, like spectators unsure which way the blame would fall. Caldwell immediately waved them over. "Officers!" "That's him," he said, pointing directly at Jalen. "I caught him trying to shoplift." One of the officers, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes, exchanged a glance with his partner. Then he turned to Jalen. "What's going on?" he asked calmly. Jalen held up the bottle and the receipt. "I bought this. I used the self-checkout. He just assumed I was stealing." Caldwell scoffed. "You think a receipt proves anything?" "He probably picked that up from the trash to fake it." Jalen's jaw clenched. "You really think I'd go through all that? For a drink and a granola bar?" The younger officer took the receipt and scanned it with his eyes. "Timestamp is fresh. Matches the items," he said. Then he gestured to the cashier. "Ma'am, did you see this young man pay?" The cashier nodded slowly, almost nervously. "Yes, I saw him scan and pay for them." Caldwell's face twitched. He was loitering, watching everyone. He didn't look like a customer. Jalen exhaled sharply. "And what does a customer look like to you?" the crowd murmured. A woman in yoga pants stepped back from her cart. An older man shook his head. Then, just as Caldwell began to defend himself, the officer's radio buzzed. The dispatcher's voice came through, responding to the officer's earlier check on Jalen's name. Standard protocol. "Confirmed ID, that's Jalen Hill." son of Samuel Hill, registered owner of Millstone Market. No priors. Clean record. A long pause filled the air. Caldwell's mouth fell open slightly, then closed again. He paled. The officer slowly turned back to him. "You just accused the owner's son of stealing," the officer said quietly. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. Jalen looked Caldwell directly in the eyes, not with arrogance, but with something far more cutting: disappointment. "I came in for a drink," he said. "I left with a reminder." The officers didn't cuff anyone. They didn't raise their voices. But the message was loud and clear. And while Jalen stood tall, Caldwell looked suddenly small. The store manager's face had drained of all color. His confident posture was gone, replaced by a stiff, almost frightened stillness. Mr. Caldwell stammered, I didn't know. No one said he was. But the damage had been done. Jalen, still gripping the bottle of juice and crumpled receipt, didn't need to say anything. The looks from the staff, from customers who had seen the confrontation unfold, said enough. Caldwell's assumptions had been laid bare for all to see, and exposed as painfully, publicly wrong. One of the officers turned to Jalen. "Would you like us to escort you out?" he asked, his tone gentle now, almost apologetic. Jalen shook his head. "No. I think I'll wait for my father." The moment he said it, the crowd stirred again. People looked at one another. Caldwell looked like he had been punched in the gut. Samuel Hill was not just the owner of Millstone Market. He was a respected figure in the community, a black entrepreneur who had built the store from scratch 10 years ago. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him. Everyone but, apparently, the man running his store. Officer Daniels gave a single nod and stepped aside. "We'll remain here until he arrives." Jalen walked slowly to the small bench near the customer service desk and sat down. His phone buzzed, and he sent a quick text. "At the store. You need to come now." 5 minutes later, the automatic doors whooshed open again. Samuel Hill entered, tall, sharply dressed, exuding quiet authority. The moment he appeared, the air seemed to shift. He walked directly toward his son, his eyes scanning the room. When he reached him, he placed a hand gently on Jalen's shoulder. "You all right?" he asked. Jalen nodded, but the weariness in his expression said more than words. Then Samuel turned, slowly, deliberately, toward Mr. Caldwell. The manager began to speak. "Mr. Hill, I had no idea." Samuel raised a hand, silencing him. Clearly. He stepped closer, voice calm but piercing. "You didn't recognize my son. That's one mistake. But assuming he was a thief just because of how he looked?" His gaze hardened. "That's something else entirely." Caldwell opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The silence in the store was profound. Not one beep at the checkout. Not one word from the bystanders. Samuel looked around the room, then back at the police officers. "Thank you for handling this professionally. I'll take it from here." Officer Daniels nodded respectfully. "Call us if you need anything further." As they exited, Samuel turned to the store staff. "Close the registers. Lock the doors." The employees blinked, startled. Caldwell took a step forward, flustered. "Sir, please. It was just—" Samuel fixed him with a look so sharp it cut off the sentence midair. "This isn't just about you embarrassing my son," he said. "It's about what kind of store this becomes, when people like him are treated like criminals, and people like you feel justified doing it." Jalen said nothing. He didn't need to. The truth was standing beside him now, and it had everyone's full attention. The store went quiet as the last customer reluctantly stepped outside, casting backward glances as the doors locked behind them. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed faintly, illuminating the faces of a dozen stunned employees and one deeply uncomfortable store manager. Samuel Hill stood in the center of the space he had built from the ground up, a place meant to feel welcoming to everyone. Now, it felt like a courtroom, and Caldwell, whether he realized it or not, had just stepped into the witness box. Jalen stood off to the side, watching. "I built this store for the community," Samuel began. "Not just as a place to shop, but as a place where people feel seen, safe, respected." His voice wasn't loud, but every word hit like a gavel. He turned to the employees, cashiers, stock clerks, the assistant manager. Is that what this store felt like today? There were uneasy shifts, nervous glances. One young man in an apron spoke quietly. No, sir, it didn't. Samuel nodded once. Then his eyes returned to Caldwell. Do you understand the weight of what you did today? He asked. Caldwell swallowed. It was a mistake. I was trying to protect the store by humiliating a teenager who paid for his items? Who you thought didn't belong here? Caldwell hesitated, eyes darting toward Jalen. I didn't know he was your son. Samuel stepped forward, closing the distance between them. And if he weren't? Would that have made your actions acceptable? The question hung in the air, like a sword suspended by thread. Jalen felt a tightness in his chest loosen as he watched his father. He'd always known his dad was respected. But this was something else. This was accountability, not just authority. Samuel finally looked away from Caldwell and addressed the staff again. We're going to shut down operations for the day. I'll pay everyone for their time. But starting tomorrow, there will be changes. New training, a new hiring policy. And most importantly, he turned back to Caldwell. A new manager. Caldwell's breath caught. Wait, what? You don't represent the values of this store. You never did, Samuel said. And today proved that in front of the entire neighborhood. Caldwell tried to speak, to salvage what he could. I didn't mean harm. I thought I was doing my job. No, Samuel replied firmly. Your job was to serve this community, not police it. He gestured toward the door. Please leave your keys with the assistant manager on the way out. For a few seconds, Caldwell didn't move. Then, realizing there was nothing more he could say, not to fix this, he nodded stiffly and walked toward the back office, defeated. The room stayed silent even after the door closed behind him. Samuel turned to his son. You okay? Jalen gave a faint smile. Better now. Samuel rested a hand on his shoulder again, his grip firm but full of warmth. This is still your store too, Jay. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. Jalen nodded slowly, letting the truth of those words settle inside him. Today had started with suspicion, but it was ending with truth, and a door to something better had just opened. The next morning, Millstone Market didn't open at its usual time. Instead of the scent of fresh bread and the clinking of carts, the store was filled with folding chairs, arranged in a semicircle near the front registers. The fluorescent lights still buzzed overhead, but there was a different kind of energy in the room, one of reflection. Samuel Hill stood at the front, in front of a whiteboard. Jalen sat beside him, no longer the quiet kid from the snack aisle, but someone whose presence now commanded silent respect. The employees, cashiers, stockers, clerks, supervisors, were gathered, looking uncertain but attentive. They knew something had changed. They had seen it unfold the day before. But what they didn't yet know was that this wasn't just about firing a manager. This was about culture. Yesterday wasn't just an embarrassment, Samuel began. It was a wake-up call. He took a marker and wrote 2 words on the board in big block letters: perception and bias. Jalen glanced around the room. He could see the discomfort. People weren't used to talking about these things, especially not in a store meeting. But his father pressed forward. We all have bias, Samuel continued. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes it's quiet. But when it starts guiding how we treat our customers or our coworkers, we lose more than business. We lose trust. He looked at each person, letting his words land. What happened to my son yesterday wasn't just a personal insult. It was a failure of our values. Jalen stood up. He hadn't planned to speak. But the room turned to him. I didn't want to make a scene, he said, voice steady. I just came in to grab something and leave. I shouldn't have had to defend my right to exist in a store my family owns. There were quiet nods. But I'm not the only one. If it happened to me, it's probably happened to others. People who didn't have a receipt or the right last name or a dad who owns the place. Someone in the back, a new part-time worker, raised their hand. I'm really sorry, Jalen, she said softly. I saw it happening, but I didn't know what to do. Jalen offered a small smile. That's why we're having this meeting. Samuel picked up again. Starting this week, we'll begin mandatory bias training for all staff, not just once, but regularly. We're creating new hiring and promotion standards that reflect this community. And I want feedback from you, anonymously or directly, about where we fall short. He paused, then added with quiet weight, we don't just sell groceries here. We build community. And a community built on fear and judgment won't last. The assistant manager, a woman who had worked there for 6 years, stood and clapped once firmly. Others followed. The applause wasn't thunderous. It wasn't even loud, but it was honest. Jalen looked at his father. For the first time since yesterday, he felt peace. Not because the problem had vanished, but because people had finally decided to see it and to do something about it. Later that week, Millstone Market quietly reopened, but everything felt different. Word of what had happened had traveled far beyond the aisles of the store. The incident had sparked online discussions, neighborhood debates, and even a few quiet apologies from longtime customers who had once made similar assumptions without ever being confronted by them. But for Jalen, the biggest change wasn't in the community. It was in himself. He was back in the store, not as a silent observer or a shadow behind his father's legacy, but as someone stepping into the light. That morning, Samuel had placed a new nameplate on the office door beside his own. Jalen Hill, Assistant Community Liaison. At first, Jalen had raised an eyebrow. This is a real job? Samuel had smiled. Real enough that I'm expecting you to lead next month's outreach fair. Jalen now walked the store floor with a clipboard in one hand and a notebook in the other. He greeted staff, checked in with customers, and took notes on things he would have ignored just a week earlier. Signage that wasn't accessible, products that didn't reflect the diverse tastes of the community, language barriers that made some patrons hesitant to ask for help. This store was his father's dream, but it was becoming part of his own, too. While adjusting a small local produce display, Jalen heard the automatic doors slide open. He turned to see a familiar face, Mr. Caldwell. He wasn't wearing a name tag anymore, just regular clothes and an unsure expression. Jalen's shoulders tensed slightly, but he stood his ground. Caldwell approached slowly, his voice low. I wanted to apologize. Again, Jalen gave a small nod, but said nothing. I was wrong. Not just about you, Caldwell continued, but about how I looked at people who didn't fit the image in my head. Jalen finally spoke. And what was that image? Caldwell hesitated. Not someone who belonged. There it was. Finally, the truth. Jalen looked him in the eye. That says more about the image than the people. Caldwell gave a sheepish nod. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to do better. Jalen let the moment linger. Then, with calm resolve, he replied, You should try. Not for me. For everyone else who walks through any door you're standing near. Caldwell gave a short nod, turned, and walked back out into the street, quieter than when he entered. Jalen stood there for a moment, watching him disappear into the flow of the town. Then he turned and resumed his walk through the store. There were still gaps in the shelves, still conversations to be had, still systems to improve. But something essential had already changed. He was no longer invisible. He was part of the foundation now, and it was only the beginning. A few weeks later, the store was buzzing, but not just with shoppers. Balloons and earthy greens and oranges framed the front entrance. A banner fluttered gently above the sliding glass doors. Community Appreciation Day, building forward together. It was Jalen's idea. What began as a quiet healing process had evolved into something bigger, a public reintroduction of Millstone Market, not as just a grocery store, but as a hub for progress, a place where every face, every voice mattered. Inside, local musicians played soft jazz near the bakery. Kids clutched coloring books, handed out by the new outreach team. A local youth mentor group set up a table, offering scholarships for Black and brown teens interested in entrepreneurship. And just outside, a food truck with Caribbean flavors served jerk chicken and plantains at a discount for anyone who presented a store receipt. At the center of it all stood Jalen, not in a suit, not behind a podium, but in a clean polo shirt with the store's logo embroidered on the chest. His clipboard was gone, replaced by easy conversation and firm handshakes. People knew him now, not because of what happened, but because of what he'd done since. His father approached, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "Crowd looks good." Jalen smiled. "Yeah, it's not just about groceries anymore." Samuel nodded proudly. "You did this." Jalen shook his head. "We did." As the day continued, people who had once passed each other in silent checkout lines now shared benches and conversation. Parents who once hesitated to bring their teens here now stayed for hours. Even the mayor had shown up, not for a photo op, but to thank the Hill family privately for turning a moment of racial injustice into something constructive and lasting. Near the end of the day, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, a young boy, no older than 10, tugged at Jalen's sleeve. "Are you the guy who owns the store?" he asked shyly. Jalen crouched to meet him at eye level. "My dad owns it," he said, "but I help take care of it." The boy smiled. "That's cool. I want to have a store someday, too." Jalen extended his hand. "Then I'll see you at the next hiring fair." The boy beamed, then ran back to his mother, proudly retelling the conversation. Jalen stood back up, watching them disappear into the crowd. He realized something then, something deeper than anger, deeper than even justice. Legacy isn't just what you inherit, it's what you build from the fire. And on that day, with his community around him and his name finally respected, Jalen began writing the first chapter of his own.